Thank you, Aaron. Let me get my camera on here. Good afternoon. This is Russ Carnahan. I'm president of Preservation Action. It's great to be with you this afternoon. We have a great program. This is Preservation Action's Preservation Month Congressional Briefing. The focus this year is on historic preservation's role in the economic recovery. Preservation Action, as you know, is a 501c4 nonprofit organization created in 1974, serve as the grassroots lobby for historic preservation. We have members in 47 states, a national board of about 100 from over 30 states, and our board is chaired by Valerie Grussing. And again, we're pleased to have you here as part of this. This is, if it's May, it's Historic Preservation Month. This has been something we've done the last several years. The focus in the past has been on congressional staff. This year, in addition to congressional staff, we have opened it up more broadly using this technology. So we're glad to have folks from around the country joining us. We are also especially glad to be doing this with Historic Preservation allied organizations. You see their logos up here. You're going to be hearing from some of their key leaders. And this year also is different. Obviously, we're not doing this in person this year. We're doing this virtually, and we're glad to have folks joining us. We also do this in conjunction with the Historic Preservation Caucus. We are very pleased to be hearing from the bipartisan congressional co-chairs of that caucus from their offices. And since we're all lovers of history here, a brief reference to this Historic Preservation Month. Many of you know this has been around a while. Back in 1973, then U.S. Senator Henry Jackson of Washington, he sponsored a joint resolution that established this date in May. And First Lady Patricia Nixon later read a presidential proclamation that in part said, as the pace of change accelerates in the world around us, Americans more than ever need a lively awareness of our roots and origins in the past and on which to base our sense of identity in the present and our direction for the future. With that, I want to turn to our format. We're going to be hearing from our co-chairs of the caucus. We're going to be hearing from our distinguished speakers. We're going to have a question and answer from each. And I'm going to ask Aaron Markovich, who's Executive Director of Maryland Milestones, who's set up this webinar for us today. Thank you, Aaron. He's also Treasurer of Preservation Action, and he's going to talk to you a bit about the format and technology we're using today. Aaron.
Thanks, Russ. I'll be mostly a disembodied voice, but I wanted to say hi. This system uses a question system, so if you do have questions for the speakers, please send them through that question box. Inside that question box, the back end here between myself and Rob Naylor, we will figure out who it is that should answer that question, if it can be answered internally, if it's a more technical question, or if it's a programmatic question about the things being discussed, and we will pose them back to the speakers today. Again, this is being recorded. It will be available within about 36 hours. And we hope that you do share that around whenever the recording is done. And please, again, if you have any technical issues or questions, don't hesitate to use that question box to ask those kinds of questions. If we do hear someone who has managed to come through and has their audio available, we will shut that down. We're not going to have any audio or video from anybody but the organizers and panelists. I think that's it, Russ.
Very good, Aaron, thank you. We are first going to hear from the bipartisan co-chairs of the Historic Preservation Caucus from the office of Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Earl was my successor. When I left Congress, he took over as the Democratic co-chair of the Historic Preservation Caucus. He's been a stalwart advocate for historic preservation, and we're pleased to be joined by his legislative assistant, John Bosworth, with a message on behalf of the congressman. John.
Thanks, Russ, and appreciate all of your work and Preservation Action's work and the entire preservation community's work as well. We've also, I'll share my webcam. This is how terrible of a millennial I am, you guys, I'm sorry. We've also really appreciated all of the work that our congressional offices and members of the Historic Preservation Caucus have done in the past. I think that a lot of us discuss historic preservation in terms of adding a sense of place or meaning or community to a lot of what we do. And I think that in a time like this, that's more important now than ever. But at the same time, facing an economic downturn that is unlike probably any of us have ever experienced in our lifetimes, I think that there's also a really important story to tell about economic recovery and the value that preservation plays in recovery, whether it be historic sites becoming tourist attractions or expanding the historic tax credit to get people back to work and revitalize communities. I think that there's a great story to tell, and certainly appreciate everyone's work and advocacy in helping us and other members of Congress tell that story to create some good things. So thanks again, appreciate the time. Sorry about the webcam, but thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And John, again, your great staff work and support of Congressman Blumenauer's leadership. We next have a recorded message from Congressman Mike Turner, who originally was going to be able to join us, but when he couldn't, he wanted to send a video message. And so we're going to set that up to hear the video message from Congressman Turner, who's the Republican co-chair, longtime co-chair of the caucus. Here's the message from Congressman Turner.
Thank you to all of the groups in attendance today for making this virtual briefing possible, and a very special thank you to Preservation Action for helping put this event together. While unfortunately I can't join you live today as co-chair of the Historic Preservation Caucus, I'm glad to appear before you, and I am glad to have supported the CARES Act that included much needed support for our communities. I'm certain that all of you are working to keep your communities and families safe. I want to thank you for all of your work to preserve the historic fabric of our nation. Historic preservation stimulates private investment, spurs economic growth, and creates jobs, while revitalizing our communities and protecting our country's cultural heritage. It is for these reasons that you can count on me to continue to support the historic tax credit. Additionally, along with my colleague and caucus co-chair, Mr. Blumenauer, I am proud to support H.R. 2825, the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act, which would boost the federal historic tax credit. H.R. 2825 includes provisions that would expand the use of the credit by making more historic properties eligible, and would also enhance the value of the historic tax credit. I greatly appreciate your support for this initiative and others that you'll be discussing today, as the Historic Preservation Caucus continues to play an integral role as your partner. You are the experts, and I greatly appreciate working closely with you to support the cause of preserving our historic assets. I'd like to thank you all for making the time for this briefing, and I look forward to continuing to work together to promote historic preservation.
Great. Special thanks to Congressman Turner for his longtime leadership role with historic preservation and the caucus, and his staffer, Nikita Mann, who also helped coordinate this today. We have our featured guest today, Donavan Rypkema, who's the principal at PlaceEconomics. When I think of Don and economists generally, I think of the famous Harry Truman quote when he got frustrated with his stable of economists always giving him contradictory answers. He famously said, "Give me a one-handed economist. All my economists say on one hand, but then on the other hand." And so Don gives it to you straight. He is his firm, PlaceEconomics, is a private sector firm with over 30 years experience thorough and robust analysis of economic impacts of historic preservation. He's undertaken assignments for public and private sector clients in 49 states. In the fall of 2012, Don received the Louis DuPont Crown and Shield Award from the National Trust, the highest preservation honor and awarded for a lifetime contribution to historic preservation in the U.S. Don has some great data on historic preservation's role in this recovery. And Don, this could not be more timely for those of us in preservation, but frankly, for our whole country. So Don, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Russ. And thank you all very much for being here. I think that my screen will show now. So I want to talk about starting out some areas where preservation might be in trouble, and then a dozen ways where it can be a real strategy that help in the very challenging recovery that we're all going to face. Almost all of the data that you'll hear comes from 10 city studies that our firm has done over the last 5 or 6 years. We have great clients, and whenever we do a study, almost every client allows us to put the report that we've completed for them on our website. And there's the address if you want to download any of these. They're in PDF form. We're more than happy for you to do that. So starting out with where it's going to be a challenge, and my criteria for this was really 2 things. One is economic sectors in the economy that have shown a strong preference for being in historic buildings, historic districts. And secondly, among that group, ones that have been being particularly hard hit by this crisis we're facing. And the first of those is small and startup and young businesses. This is a place where they disproportionately prefer to be in historic neighborhoods. In Saratoga Springs, small town in upstate New York, where they're 22% of all the jobs from the historic district, 31% of the small firm jobs, and almost half of the young firm jobs have chosen to be in historic districts. On the map on the left, the purple and the green map, that's San Antonio. And the purple areas are local historic districts. The green circles are the number of jobs in small businesses. And you can see it's not that they're all in historic districts, but there's a real pattern of being in or near a preference, a revealed preference for those locations in the city. And then Manhattan, which is supposed to be such a hard place to go in business, and maybe it is. The historic districts in Manhattan have a 12.5% of all jobs, but 18% of jobs in startup businesses, 18% of young businesses. Well, 51% of the businesses, more than half of businesses, said that they're not sure they're going to be around for 3 more months. So these are going to be particularly hard hit. The second, and often a subset of that, is businesses in the knowledge worker and the creative class businesses. Again, this will never be a giant share of the entire workforce, but it's a particularly important one because it often leads the way for other activities. Again, in Manhattan, you can like New York or hate New York, but nobody can say that it's not one of the most creative cities in the world. And where those historic districts have 12.5% of all jobs, almost 24% of those creative class jobs in arts, entertainment, and recreation are in those historic districts. In Indianapolis, very different city. Again, about 16% of all jobs in historic districts, but 28% of jobs in that really knowledge worker category of professional, scientific, and technical services. Then, of course, food and beverage. That just in 1 month, the food and beverage industry shed half their workforce. Incredible loss of jobs. But it's really an important sector within who prefers to use historic buildings. In Nashville, where about 3% of all jobs are in historic districts, 24% of the growth in the accommodation food services was in those historic districts. Again, in the city of New York, that has 8% of all jobs in historic districts, almost 13% of those restaurants are in those historic districts. And a couple years ago, we did a study in the state of Rhode Island, and we always like to look at kind of alternative ways of measuring things. So we looked at the favorite restaurants on Yelp. Well, lo and behold, 2/3 of them were in historic districts. So those are places that there's going to be vulnerability. And finally, clearly tourism. Last week's numbers on hotels, occupancy down 70%, their rates down 45%, revenue per room 83%. So they're in big trouble. Well, it's not just tourism, but heritage tourism has a particularly strong effect. In Nashville, heritage tourists spend about 1/3 more than tourists in general. In San Antonio, not only do they spend more, but heritage visitors spend more in every single category: lodging, transportation, food and beverage, retail, and recreation. So those are all going to be hit. And we just finished a look in St. Augustine, Florida, where 55% of their visitors fall in the heritage visitor category. They spend $1.6 million a day over the course of the year, and $970,000 goes in people's pockets. So the drop in tourism is going to have a huge impact, and often negative, on historic preservation. But there's going to be ways that, in fact, historic preservation can help lead us out of this crisis. And the first is just the issue of jobs. In Columbus, Ohio, where we did a study a couple years ago, every time $1 million is spent rehabilitating a historic building, that's almost 6 direct jobs and another 5 indirect jobs, with a labor income of $400,000 in direct jobs, another $250. So it's a major job production. And those jobs have a huge local impact because they are labor-intensive activity. There's 20% more jobs with the same amount of money in rehabilitation as there is in new construction. So across the U.S., every time 100 jobs are created in new construction, there's 135 jobs created elsewhere in the economy. But every time there's 100 jobs in rehabilitation, there's 186 jobs. So it's this extraordinary spin-off effect that's both in numbers of jobs and the payrolls those jobs represent. And then we have an issue where we have, in many of the trades, a skill shortage. Those are good pay, particularly for people without advanced formal education, and they're living wage jobs, and there's a need for job training. And so if there's a way somehow in this recovery to combine this, people unemployed, people needing skills, preservation needing trained workers, that ought to be a central part of a recovery effort. Then the issue about property value growth. Again, it's an issue that we looked at in almost every time we do a study, and the change in value over time of properties in historic districts. So here is Indianapolis on the left. Here is Savannah on the right. Every single local historic district in both of those cities, in fact, outperformed the market. And look at the dates. In both cases, they started when we had kind of ludicrously increasing prices of real estate, then a crash, and then a gradual recovery. And some of these are wealthy neighborhoods. Some of them are the opposite of wealthy. Doesn't make any difference. Every local historic district outperformed the market of the whole in those cities and every city that we've looked at. And sometimes we stop with the thinking about property owners when we talk about property values, but that's just the kind of first half of the story, is that when there's higher rates of value growth in the property, that means there's higher assessed values, meaning greater local property tax revenues. Maybe after the hospitality industry and retailing, the biggest hit being taken now in this pandemic is local governments. They depend, school districts, counties, and cities depend on local property tax. Well, when you have higher values, you have higher property tax revenues, meaning you have more money to meet the services demanded by local taxpayers. In one study we did in Savannah, we looked at this increased rate of property appreciation in historic districts. Not the whole value, just the increased value, the value increase as a result of the increased rate of appreciation. Well, in Savannah, like in most of your communities, the school district, the city, and the county get share of the tax, the property tax revenues, just the taxes on that preservation premium of those properties. The school district could pay 86 teachers. The county could pay a quarter of the entire sheriff's budget, and the city could provide $200 a month rental subsidies for almost 1,300 families. So that increased value means increased revenue, meaning helping out what are very hard-strapped cities. We can't guarantee that this will happen this time, but it certainly happened last time, is that the preserved properties in historic districts led the way out of the recession. Of course, we had a giant real estate crash. And on your left is what happened in Miami-Dade County. Then in the years before the crash, properties in historic districts went up more than the rest of the city. When there was the crash, they went down, but they went down less than the rest of the city. And when they recovered better than the city. On your right is San Antonio. Again, over that same period of up values, crash values, recovery values. In San Antonio, they have both traditional historic districts, also conservation districts. And what happened over that lifetime cycle? The ones that went up the most and were damaged the least by the recession was properties in local historic districts. The ones that did the second best were those conservation districts, both of which outperformed the market as a whole. And then something that everybody needs to be paying attention to, and that's the foreclosure patterns. And again, we're going to have a real estate crisis. You can't have 20% of the population unemployed and not have foreclosures showing. It's going to happen. Well, again, what happened last time? Again, we probably looked at 30 cities on this pattern, the same every place, is that the rate of foreclosure in historic districts are less than the city as a whole, often dramatically less. Here is San Antonio and Raleigh, for examples. In Raleigh, 1 in every 10 properties, in fact, faced foreclosure over the recession. The rate in National Register districts was half of that, and about 40% less in local historic districts. And once again, the income of the people living in those districts is not one of the variables. In every instance, the local historic districts, in fact, suffered less in foreclosure than did the rest of the market. Then we have this issue about growth and a big cost for local government's infrastructure. But when we have, historic properties every place are in existing neighborhoods. And so when we have vacant lots, when we have properties that can be rehabilitated, we in fact can have that growth in a city without adding new water lines, sewer, curb and gutter. You know, every fourth grader in America learns that to be responsibly environmentally, you need to reuse, reduce, repair, and recycle. But in this recovery, we have to think about that not just in the environment, but also for the economy. In Los Angeles, where we finished a study earlier this year, a quarter of everything that goes into the landfill there is from construction debris. And when a modest-sized 2,000 square foot house is torn down in Los Angeles, 295 yards of debris goes into the landfill. And landfills are increasingly expensive, both in dollars and environmental quality. But jumping back on the 4 R's, so when we do rehabilitation, we're reducing what goes into the landfill, we're reducing public expenditures on infrastructure, we're reusing the materials, we're reusing the skills of 2 or 3 generations ago, we're repairing both the buildings and the blight. And really interesting, we finished earlier this year a study of the Main Street program in North Carolina, a great program, been around 40 years, and did a questionnaire of people familiar with Main Street. Main Street is economic development in the context of historic preservation. One of the big victories over 40 years was an increased level of pride in their community. And then when recycle, well, we're recycling the whole building. There's a really excellent study released about 2 years ago about the use of the low-income housing tax credit. They looked at 2,500 projects around the country. The per unit cost for new construction low-income housing tax credit projects, about $209,000. Acquisition and rehab projects using existing buildings, $153,000. Now that's what you can be on whatever side of the political aisle you want to be, but that's making fiscally responsible use of scarce public dollars. Then density, and density is going to be a real challenge after this pandemic, is that people are going to be suspicious of density. And I think that high rises are going to be in big trouble. But the reasons that we need density for the effective cost of infrastructure, for effectiveness of public transportation, for walkability, there's a whole lot of reasons why density is a good idea, and people are going to be suspicious of density. But what we found is that in historic districts, what we have is density at a human scale. In Indianapolis, about 1/3 more density in historic districts than the rest of the urban area of Indianapolis. In Los Angeles, a historically low-dense place, the density in historic districts is twice that of the rest of the residential neighborhoods in the city. And Raleigh, the same pattern is that the local historic district density that don't feel density, you're not looking at 40-story condos, but provide the density a city needs is twice of the city as a whole. And then there's this local impact of preservation. Every time $1 million is spent rehabilitating a local building, there's going to be $83,000 more spent in local stores than if you spend $1 million building a new building. That's why it has this extraordinarily powerful effect when we look at what's going to happen in the recovery. And then finally, and it was mentioned earlier, that really an important role of historic preservation is just what it gives us the sense of our community, what we're there. Well, I have to think that historic neighborhoods, historic parks, historic areas, historic downtowns are going to be really important in the kind of re-socialization when we're able to do that. So since the first of the year, PlaceEconomics has put out 2 publications, one called 24 Reasons Historic Preservation is Good for Your Community, downloadable. You'll read lots of the data we've gotten from our studies. You're welcome to undo it. And then our firm has made some modest suggestions about specific roles of historic buildings and older buildings as part of the recovery, and you're welcome to download that as well. Thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to any questions you might have. Thanks very much.
Don, thank you so much. That is a wealth of information, and we're looking forward to the question and answer session. We are next going to go to Erik Hein. Erik is the Executive Director of the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers. He is also a former president of Preservation Action. Continues to serve on the board, and they're one of our major ally organization sponsors. Erik, welcome.
Thank you, Russ, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit first about our National Historic Preservation Program. Our nation's preservation program is a little unique from other countries. We don't have a centralized ministry of historic preservation or culture. Rather, our model is based on the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And as you can see on the screen, several other previous laws. And it's decidedly American. It operates on a more federalist principle, relying upon a partnership between the federal government, states through state historic preservation officers, and tribes through tribal historic preservation officers, as well as local governments. Because the theory is that they not only know more about the historic resources in their areas and communities, but because it then provides citizens' input into federal decision making. Move to the next slide, please. States and tribes are delegated a variety of responsibilities, including federal project review, otherwise known as Section 106, National Register nominations, historic tax credit project reviews, historic property survey and inventories, certified local government programs, education, and more. To do this work, in 1976, Congress established the Historic Preservation Fund, or as we call it, the HPF. Funded from an annual deposit of lease revenues from the Outer Continental Shelf, the HPF is not supported by tax dollars. Each year, Congress appropriates from the HPF to fund THPOS, THPOS, and several grant programs, some of which my colleague Tom will talk about shortly. Next slide. As a result of the pandemic, states and tribes have found themselves struggling to maintain their operations in a remote or virtual environment. Years of underfunding have left many states unable to invest in the technology necessary for fully electronic records, databases, GIS systems, or project submission systems. Without access to their offices or these records, project review timelines suffer. Next slide, please. This is why we're seeking a supplemental appropriation from the HPF. $30 million for SHPOs and $15 million for THPOS. It would not only help them to be more prepared for the next disaster by letting them invest in the systems, it would assure overall a more modern, efficient, and streamlined project review process. Our members are also acutely aware of the impact of this pandemic on the communities in which we all live. Recognizing the catalytic effects of historic preservation projects, as articulated by Donavan just a few minutes ago, and considering the most effective way to distribute funds, we're also proposing $75 million in funding for certified local governments, or CLGs. Currently, 10% of the annual apportionments to SHPOs from the HPF must be distributed to more than 2,000 CLGs for historic preservation projects, planning, and education. Since our members already have the infrastructure in place to award those grants, funds can be broadly and efficiently distributed through the CLG program, providing a positive and effective way to make a difference in local communities.
Next, we're going to go to, thank you, Erik. Next, we're going to go to Dr. Valerie Grussing. She is the Executive Director of the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, or NATHPO. Valerie, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Russ and everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am Valerie Grussing, Executive Director of NATHPO. A little bit of background here. What are Tribal Historic Preservation Officers? THPOS are designated by federally recognized tribal governments that have an agreement with the Department of the Interior to assume the role of the SHPO on tribal lands, and also under the requirements of the NHPA to serve as the consultation expert on ancestral lands, which is essentially everywhere. So THPOS represent an exercise of tribal sovereignty, and they also make SHPO's jobs a little bit easier. Currently, there are 195 National Park Service recognized THPOS, and the HPF is the sole source of dedicated federal funding for them, of which their line item this year is almost $14 million. Using a similar apportionment formula to SHPOs, that averages out to about $70,000 per THPO. Over the years, the HPF tribal appropriation has steadily increased, and we're very grateful for that. But unlike SHPOs, there are more THPOs every year. The result is that the average apportionment per THPO has slightly decreased over time. And normally I've got a lovely little graph that probably many of you have seen. But some quick numbers: in 1996, which was the first year of HPF funding for THPOs, the original 12 of them received an average of $80,000. And this year, 194 of them received an average of $70,000 to run their entire program. So outside of the pandemic, this is one type of recovery that tribes need. Next slide. What is at stake here? There are two primary points that I always make. Number one, reconnecting Native peoples to their cultural heritage, traditions, and places has the power to help heal deep generational wounds. We're all familiar with the many epidemics that are rampant in Indian country. That's in ordinary circumstances, not pandemics. And these represent the symptoms. Of course, we need to continue to treat the symptoms, but we must also address the cause, which is historical trauma. Revitalizing traditions, languages, and practices serves to rebuild individual self-worth and community foundations. This is another type of recovery that tribes need. My second point is that funding THPOs and staff creates jobs, economic development, and community revitalization. It also facilitates environmental and historic review processes, including for infrastructure permitting. When agencies and project applicants call, someone has to be there to pick up the phone and do the work. And now, during this time, many THPO offices are closed. Although construction has been deemed essential, requiring the input of SHPOs and THPOs, funds have not made it to them from state and tribal governments. Tribal casinos are shut down, which only 40% of all tribes have anyway. CARES Act funds for tribes are delayed, partly by litigation, and of course, many tribes are being disproportionately affected by COVID. So those are my points. We greatly appreciate support for our supplemental appropriation ask of $15 million for THPOS. And while paper is also a problem, as Erik said, for tribes, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you.
Valerie, thank you so much for that brief overview. And next, I want to introduce Tom Cassidy. Tom is the Vice President for Government Relations at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Been there since 2011. He's responsible for the overall direction and management of the Trust Government Relations agenda. Tom, it's great to have you with us, and take it away.
Thank you, Russ, and everybody else. Very pleased to be here. If we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we did right after the CARES Act was passed was do an analysis of it, and we were very, very pleased to see the creation of the Paycheck Protection Program. Many nonprofits and businesses have benefited from its program of forgivable loans for small businesses and nonprofits. We were also pleased that it provided a universal above-the-line deduction for charitable contributions and created additional funding for the arts and humanities communities. We began talking to some of our colleagues and determined that we needed to make a big ask for the next bill whenever it may be. So on April 30th, we submitted to the Congress a letter that Preservation Action participated in, and our friends at the National Trust Community Investment Corporation and others, and ultimately 380 preservation nonprofits and businesses signed on to this letter. Can we see the next slide, please? So there are a suite. Can we get the next? Oh, thank you. There are a suite of asks in here. Certainly, Patrick Robertson is going to be describing the federal historic tax credit, and certainly Donavan Rypkema has done great work on the catalytic impact of the historic tax credit. That was actually a report that we commissioned from Donavan. But the job-creating benefits of the historic tax credit are very well known. I was very pleased to see Donavan describe the economic impacts of rehab projects in general. And in addition to supporting THPOS and NAFPO's proposal of $120 million for the HPF, after talking to some Hill staff, we wanted to provide even more rehab grants, and I was advised just do it through existing programs. And so we are proposing that $75 million each go into established competitive grant programs for civil rights, historically Black colleges and universities, Save America's Treasures, and the Paul Brune revitalization program that's been championed in the Senate. We are just completing what we believe is the first analysis of the bricks and mortar and ultimately job creating impacts of these competitive grants. And what we are finding is certainly all of the grants to HBCUs, those are all brick and mortar grants. The grants for Paul Brune programs, those are bricks and mortar grants. It appears that about upwards of 70% of Save America Treasures grants go to bricks and mortars. The remainder goes to collections, which also employs people. And then we've been very surprised that a program that we have championed because it tells the larger story of the full story of American history, initially African American civil rights grants, but it's been expanded. We have found that over a 4-year period, 87% of those grants have funded bricks and mortar projects, including such legendary places as the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. You'll see here some of the other programs that we are advocating for whatever the next bill is. None of us knows when that bill is going to be that's going to focus on stimulus, but we think that these are the types of provisions that will create real jobs, well-paying jobs on the ground, and also enrich the nation's infrastructure of cultural and historic resources. There are some links here that you can find out more about what we're doing. We're even doing yet another webinar next week on support for preservation during the pandemic. So thank you, Russ, and I look forward to working with people on the phone and back on the Hill one day.
I second that, Tom. Thank you for your leadership from the trust in working with all these national partners. Next, we are very pleased to have Patrick Robertson. He is a principal of Confluence Government Relations. He's worked closely on the issue of the historic tax credits for several years with the Historic Tax Credit Coalition. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Carnahan. Glad to be here, and thank you to Preservation Action for putting this all together. You've all heard a lot of information, but I represent the Historic Tax Credit Coalition, as Russ mentioned, and it is a group of people who care about the HTC, want to make it better, want to improve it. Although they are not members, there are a few people on here who also care about the Historic Tax Credit, including the Office of Earl Blumenauer, the Office of Mike Turner, and Preservation Action and NICSPO and others, and we're happy to be able to work with them. What you see on this slide and also in your handout section is a bit of a document that we put together to send to the Hill. There were some folks who asked us what would help the HTC industry recover from the pandemic and the economic shutdown that followed as a result of the pandemic. And so we put this proposal together, and it does a number of things. The first recommendation is that Congress pass HTC GO, known as the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act. This is a bill that many of you who have been involved in federal advocacy on the historic tax credit in the past know and maybe even love. We certainly love it. Earl Blumenauer, whose staffer, John Bosworth, was on the webinar earlier and is, I think, still with us as the lead sponsor of that bill in the House, and Mr. Turner is a co-sponsor, and we very much appreciate that. And that bill would do a few things. It would eliminate the basis adjustment on historic tax credit deals. It would reduce the amount you have to pay, you have to spend for the substantial rehab test to 50% of your adjusted basis. It would make it easier for nonprofits to use the credit, so you would get more community health centers and homeless services centers and arts destinations and those kind of things in the program. And it would also increase to 30% the credit for small deals or deals under about $2.5 million in QREs. And then the last thing it would do, it would also allow those deals to be certificated, so you could directly sell the credit. There is a Senate companion bill that Senator Bill Cassidy has introduced with Senator Ben Cardin and others. And that bill's identical, except it does not include the certification piece. So that was recommendation number one, include the HTC GO bill. Recommendation number two is based on some of the things that we saw post-Katrina and post-Iowa flooding in emergency designations. So after these federally declared disasters, after a natural disaster, the credit was increased in the Gulf Opportunity Zones, also known as GO zones, and also in Iowa after flooding. And those increases really helped drive the recovery. Now, obviously, the COVID-19 crisis is different. There is not physical damage to buildings, but the economic damage is much more severe and much more widespread, especially. It's obviously all across the country. So we've recommended that the credit be increased for all projects to 30% for 5 years, and then step down over 2 years and return to 20% over those 2 years. So you would see an increase in the credit to try to get money and projects moving. I think the crisis that we're looking at now is going to do two things to the historic tax credit market. One, it's going to hurt deals that are in progress, either in construction or financial negotiations. But secondly, it's really going to have a slowdown effect on future deals as investors try to decide what kind of tax liability they have and what kind of tax risk appetite they have, as downtowns and city centers and main streets really start to suffer in terms of rent and storefronts as people come back or not. I'm doing some work for a coalition of restaurants now, and there's a current study by the James Beard Foundation that says 70% of restaurants aren't sure they'll be able to reopen on the other side of this pandemic. So to Mr. Rypkema's points about population density and high rises and downtowns and all the businesses associated with them, I think lease up and continued leasing is going to be a problem, as well as just how big a project can you do, not to mention the number of businesses that have hotels and other things in their portfolios. So HTC Go and that bump up to 30% are two of the ways that we look at to try to keep the industry moving forward. And as Donavan said earlier, most of the spend on rehab is local. Most of the labor is local. It is highly skilled. So money spent on preservation is money well spent and money that stays in the place where it's spent, which is super important as we look at economic recovery and making sure that that recovery covers the folks we need it to. The other two ideas in the document that's in front of you are one, allowing for projects that are in process to have an extension on their dates. Currently, you have 24 months or 60 months to complete your substantial rehab period. That's something that's enormously important to projects. The way you get your credit is completing the work in that amount of time. If you're in the middle of that 24-month period or 60-month period or toward the end, and now workers can't be on site, you can't get materials, workers have to be 6 feet apart, so you have 10% of the workers or some other issue around the coronavirus, you're going to have a hard time meeting that deadline. Compounding that problem is that there are grandfathered deals that are under the transition rule and tax reform for a 1-year federal historic tax credit, who must finish their substantial rehab test by June 20th, 2020. And the way things are going, there may not be workers on site in a lot of places before then. And then you have to place in service by December 31st, 2020. So the Historic Tax Credit Coalition has written a letter to Treasury asking for relief on this issue. There are some folks on the Hill who are considering sending their own letter to Treasury as well, sort of echoing our sentiments and asking for the same thing, and we're hopeful that we'll get relief on that. And then finally, in the CARES Act that was referenced earlier, net operating losses were allowed to be carried back for a number of years. It is possible that there's going to be an effort afoot by other tax credits to allow a longer carryback and also eliminate the 75/20 rule that talks about how you can carry credits back. And I think that our ask to Congress is, if you do this for other credits, you should do it for us. I want to note, before I give the floor back, first, that the coalition is supportive of Preservation Action's asks on the Historic Preservation Fund, and also those asks of the National Trust for Historic Preservation that make the state credit, the federal credits stronger. We're always happy to support our partners at the SHPO offices and at the Park Service, and want to make sure they have the resources they need to do this. I will say, Erik made the point that SHPOs are struggling with distance work and moving out of their offices and being home and getting access to their files, but at the same time, they're soldiering on through all of this. They're still approving projects and applications or rejecting them, right? But they're working with applicants to make sure that the work's getting done, as is the Park Service. And in the industry, we had a lot of concern about what remote work would look like, and we've been very impressed with both the SHPOs and with the Park Service and what they've done to adapt. And finally, Russ, before I hand this back to you, I just want to thank you all again for having us on. Note all the logos on this slide of folks who are helpful and have cared about our requests for the Federal Historic Tax Credit. And I'm happy to answer questions. I know that was fairly technical and fairly quick, So I think we'll have time for questions at the end, but also people should feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions they have after the webinar. And thank you all very much.
Great, Patrick, thank you. And thank all the panelists. That was a really tremendous overview and reasons for us to really recognize and celebrate historic preservation this month, but also this special focus on how preservation can truly contribute to our economic recovery. We want to go to questions now. And Aaron and Rob, I believe, are managing those. So you can go to the question queue, but let's, Aaron or Rob, can you tee up some of the questions we have for the panelists?
Sure. Hi, this is Rob Miller with Preservation Action. I can start with the first one here. I think this might be most directed towards Don. Where can federal policy on historic preservation and housing affordability find common ground? When it comes to historic preservation, how as a society can we not always throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Thanks. A great question. And again, we're not in the political business, and maybe it stems from my political perspective, but I think when we're having zillions of dollars being spent, we ought to spend them in a fashion that serves more than one purpose. So the other crisis that we have beyond the pandemic, we have an affordable housing crisis, and a huge chunk of people in affordable housing are in old housing. Some of it historically designated, most of it not. But I think we as preservationists need to broaden our definition of what we need to save. And then we need to look, if I were the czar, I'd have central in any recovery strategy, how we merge attention to historic buildings and older buildings with responding to affordable housing needs. So when we're going to be encumbering our grandchildren with paying off this debt, at least it's going to be in long-term assets that both helps the historic character and quality of cities, but also helps the people who need affordable housing.
Great, thank you, Don. How about next question?
Sure. We also had a couple questions regarding how do we get private owners tax incentives that encourage them to invest in their own property? So I think this kind of goes back to historic tax credits for historic homes.
Don, you want to take a stab at that?
I'll be happy to. One of the other recommendations we have in our little recommendation thing is to revisit and resurrect the historic homeowners tax credit. That would, I'll tell you, it would do more to have people invest in their houses than 1,000 new HUD programs. It could work. The infrastructure is there to overview it, to see how it works, and it would do huge amounts in neighborhoods that are going to be suffering all over the country as a result of this, and to put the historic homeowners tax credit as an effective tool, as is proven on the commercial side, to people's houses would be a huge, huge difference in the quality and affordability and investment in cities all over the country.
Great, thank you. Rob, next question.
Sure. One thing that the current pandemic has kind of exposed is the horror of the virus is also clean the air, planet, and how can historic preservation help to restart the economy and not repollute the atmosphere?
Well, I hate to take all the questions, but this environmental side of preservation, I think, has been under-recognized, including by, frankly, the environmental movement, that when we're reinvesting in what we have already, and it's part of that 4 Rs thing, that in fact is a fundamentally environmental response response, a fundamental exercise of environmental responsibility. And so we can just broaden our thinking and say, hey, if we don't want to screw up the environment anymore, because we have this also the crisis of climate change, then we ought to be doing things that are environmentally responsible in our building industry. And I'm telling you, vastly more responsible to reinvest in the buildings we already have than building new buildings. Not that we don't need new buildings, of course we do, but to the extent that we can reinvest in the buildings we already have makes a huge difference in the whole climate change equation.
Thank you, Don. Next question.
Yeah, I think this one might be best geared towards Patrick. Is there coordination between the idea of possible changes to the historic tax credit and how it will work with the low-income housing tax credit? Can this be made easier and better?
Sure. There are a couple things. I think there is a misconception out there, and it's been written in a few places, and we are working to dispel it, that historic preservation makes affordable housing more difficult. Our data shows that a significant portion of HTC projects are also LIHTC projects, and the Park Service gathers some rudimentary data on how many affordable units are created through the historic tax credit, but we're working on a mapping project to overlay that data and see if we can figure out a little better how much historic work is really affordable housing work. In terms of the legislative proposals, because the historic tax credit has a basis adjustment and LIHTC does not, when they are used together on the same project, the LIHTC project has to take the historic basis rules, which take some of the value out of both credits. And so if the basis adjustment were eliminated, it would make it easier for LIHTC and historic projects to be twinned together. Coincidentally, we think it would also make it easier for HTC and opportunity zone projects as well, because opportunity zones have a zero basis, and it would be hard to adjust a zero basis negatively as well. A, we think historic and LIHTC already work okay together, and B, we believe we have a proposal to sort of put them on rocket fuel and get more affordable units in the HTC universe.
Thank you, Patrick. Rob, do we have any more questions? We're close to our wind-up time.
Yeah, we have a couple more here. If we don't get to all of these during this, we're happy to answer these following the webinar and get those back to you. But I think we'll go ahead and close this out real quick with a question, or more of a, I think this directed towards Don. If you could comment on what lenders are doing and whether they're slowing down or stopping reviews approval of projects in the pipeline, let alone new projects.
Well, Patrick probably better to answer than I, but everything I've read is that the underwriting standards are going up, suspicions going up, loans going down, and less favorable in spite of low interest rates. So the whole fight, it's going to be this ripple effect. People out of work, tougher standards on borrowing money, more projects perceived as risky, and it's just going to compound, and it's going to have a negative effect in the real estate industry as a whole, but I think historic properties in particular.
Certainly, there are some sophisticated historic investors who have done this a number of times, who are going forward with their own conditions and cautions. I wouldn't say that the market is closed. The Federal Reserve and Congress have put almost $3 trillion into the economy already. So there's money out there to be had. One of the open questions, however, is what an investor's potential tax liability would be that they would use the historic tax credit to offset. And some other questions are what the uptake and rental rate is going to be. So there are certainly challenges, and I believe you'll see a slowdown. But if we were to put more value back into the system and make some of the changes that our proposal envisions, we think we can offset a lot of the downturn by making the HTC more attractive for folks to use.
And this might be the last one for us here, but I think it's a good note to end on, is where are we kind of in the legislative process regarding potential bills to address the economic recovery, and how preservation will potentially fit into that?
Sure, Rob, I'll do my best to answer this concisely, but completely. Congress has passed sort of 3.5 bipartisan bills, both to sort of fund medical equipment and start to fund coronavirus response, to the larger $2 trillion bill they passed about a month or so ago now, plus a refilling of the Paycheck Protection Plan program. Last Friday, the House passed a bill that was largely a Democratic effort that spent about $3 trillion more dollars. The Senate has said that that bill is dead on arrival in the Senate. I think when you talk to people who are serious about a bipartisan deal, they say what needs to happen is people need to go home for the Memorial Day recess. And when they come back in June, they're really going to start to think about where middle ground is. I had a client at the White House yesterday talking about the unique situation of restaurants, and there also is there's an acknowledgement from the administration about what the economic challenges are. I just don't think there's yet an agreement on what the solution is. So with the huge package that came out of the House, that's really their starting point, and what I would describe as sort of the liberal position on where we go to make the economy better. There may be a conservative bill, or they may just negotiate from that bill to get something that's a little more targeted and focused. But at the same time, I can't personally imagine a scenario in which the trajectory of the virus and the economic recovery continues the way it's going, and that Congress doesn't have to step in and act in some form or fashion to either, again, stabilize the economy somehow, or to try to encourage and fuel an economic recovery with new policies and some new spending as well. So Tom and others may have another view, but that's at least how I come at this.
Well, Patrick, thank you. I think we're going to leave it on that note, and just special thanks to everyone who joined us today. Special thanks to our panelists and the work that they do and that you've heard about today. Again, special thanks to John Bosworth, staff in Congressman Blumenauer's office, Nikita Mann in Congressman Turner's office, Board Chair Valerie Grussing, Vice President Edward Hall, our Vice President Stephanie Phillips, who worked on this diligently, Bruce McDougall and Rob Naylor from our staff. Please, and Aaron Markovich for hosting our technology today. And please be sure to check out the handouts that you see on your screen under the handout tab. They have the Historic Preservation Community Letter led by the Trust, the Historic Preservation Assistance Request from NICSPO and NAFPO, the Historic Tax Credit Economic Stimulus Request, the description and contacts for the organizations that were here today, and information about joining the Historic Preservation Caucus. So any congressional staffers on here, if your member of Congress is not in the caucus, please help us facilitate them joining. We look forward to working with you all to continue to make the case for historic preservation in the context of our recovery. Thank you all. Be safe, be in touch, and we look forward to working with you with Preservation Action and our great colleagues and allied organizations. Take care. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. The recording is now concluded.